Serious, former teens who went to wilderness camps, therapeutic boarding schools and other troubled teen programs. What were your experiences? I ran away from home a lot when I was young. Eventually my parents sent me to this super religious detention home in Louisiana. Here go that place. battleoffortimes.com link. The first day there, I was stripped to my underwear and t-shirt and locked in a closet. I had a coffee can with some pine oil in it to piss in. And a mattress on the floor with one blanket and no pillow. The light switch was outside the closet, so I had no control over the light, day or night. The door had holes drilled into it about head high, and they hung a tape recorder on the door from the outside that played nothing but hellfire and brimstone preachers and church services 8 hours a day. I was allowed twice a day to poop, and once every other day to shower, but that was it for the first 3 weeks. When I finally got put into the general population, I made it about a week before I managed to run away. But they caught me in Dallas and sent me right back. I was locked in the closet again for another 2 weeks. But then shortly after that the state came in and shut the whole place down for abuse and neglect. Edit. This blew up while I was asleep. But thanks to everyone for the good thoughts and well wishes. Dear Lord. I posted about my bitter experiences at one of these schools. While it was miserable and abusive, it doesn't compare to this at all. The school I was at was peddling Mormon stuff all the time, and when you were in trouble you got put into a cell in your underwear. You had to work off demerits when you were in trouble, which was standing at attention with your nose a few inches from the wall for 25 minutes. A typical cause was cussing, which was 5 demerits. So 2.5 hours against a wall. Fighting was 150. So you'd spend weeks just standing in your underwear all day against a wall. I did Outward Bound when I was 18. The group consisted of about 14 of us, all between the ages of 16 and 20. One girl was sent by her parents, I assume to straighten her up. On the first night we camped, she fled. She took a map, a compass, and I think some matches and was gone when we woke up. We were told later she had made it to a road and hitchhiked to somewhere. I think she eventually made it home. If there are camps specifically for kids in trouble, her parents should have sent her to one of those. Edit. After reading the other stories, I think I see why her parents didn't send her to a place for trouble kids. JFC. I went to Outward Bound at 15. I was a good kid, but my brother was a really difficult kid, so my parents sent him at 15. When he came back it seemed to be a good experience, so they decided to do it for all 3 kids. My experience was fine. I always liked the outdoors and camping, so it wasn't that big of issue. However, I was definitely one of the better off kids there. No one ran away. We got annoyed at each other, but nothing crazy. I guess my experience was pretty chill compared to others in this thread. Also, I didn't poop for a long time, so they made me keep a poop journal to make sure I didn't have any digestive problems. This is a thing that always happens at bigger camps with our scout group. After we adjusted to our surrounding for 3 or 4 days, the group leaders will ask the P question. Have you pooped while being here? This sounds a lot less gracefully than in my language XD. If the answer is yes, then everything's fine. If it isn't, you can request to have plum with your dessert that day. I've never had problems, but I'll always take the plum anyways because I love plums. Just got out of a year-long program for drug abuse behavioral therapy type stuff, and it was religion based, and it was definitely something that I was not prepared to get myself into. I ended up getting an assault charge and sent to basically a prison for juveniles for a few days while I was there because a kid dumped 2 gallons of water on my bed and I whipped him with a guitar string. Not the best choice I've ever made. Now it is off my record, but that was definitely a turning point in the way I treat myself and others. I've got a lot of stories from there, so if you wanna hear any, I'm open. Give me a crazy story. One time me and my roommates were trying to sleep and it was about 2 in the morning, and at night we only had one staff there and nobody liked him. We will call him Rick. People always gave Rick shit because he was old and he either didn't hear us or he didn't care, but he was really funny. So that night there is yelling that is keeping everyone up, and I went out of my room and there are kids on top of the front desk ceiling pissing all over Rick and swearing at him. I just went in and tried my best to sleep and acted like nothing happened. In the morning I found out that the cops were called and a few kids were hit with some charges and sent away. Went to Discovery Academy in Provo, Utah for 2 years. Until my parents went bankrupt and the school kicked me out. They also refused to release my transcript, so I ended up having to get a GED because I was technically 2 years behind. This place had some amazing tools for parents with troubled kids. They had goons that would fly to your home and take your child out of their bed in the middle of the night and escort them to Provo. They had comfortable rooms that were probably 4x12 with no doors that you got to stand in all day in nothing but your underwear with a counselor guard outside. Hazing and bullying were essential to the therapy. An attempted suicide in your room was an indicator you were going to succeed there and generate them revenue until you were 18. It had decent moments. But there was so much misery. So much Mormon indoctrination. And so many abuses of power over the students. Edit. I saw this in another post and had to add it here. I learned school link, just read that comic. I was at Provo Canyon School. Just down the road from you. Sounds like they were ran by the same folks. I was there 17 years ago. I think it is a behavioral hospital now. My father lost custody of me for domestic violence and I got scooped up by CPS and put into the group home system. He got custody back a couple of months later and I ended up running away. They sent me to a place called Vision Quest, which was a place with troublemakers. But not that bad. The thing that was bad was that there wasn't any food. I was eating little single serving cups of cream cheese. Ended up running from there with another dude. And when we got picked up I ended up in a residential treatment facility. Mostly because they didn't know what to do with me since I didn't earn any jail time along the way. That place was full of mostly Native American kids. Some of them were from rival gangs. The violence was pretty bad. Midnight beatdowns. Gang fights. Racial violence, sexual abuse, etc. The people running it really seemed to mean well and were actually pretty fair about seeing what really happened versus everyone gets punished. No matter what. Despite what the other kids were like. It was the first time anyone really told me that it was my family that was wrong and to just focus on the program and work towards an independent living program. Which I did. I worked in a residential treatment facility. I don't think they work because of your last sentence. It was never really the kid. They were just a product of their family and community, which we couldn't do anything about. I had to work with a lot of the older teens on going it alone once they left. Otherwise they'd likely end up in jail. I know a few that ended up doing some pretty bad things. Then others that did really well. Hope you're doing okay. All that shit is so traumatizing. I worked in a residential center too. And exactly what you said is why I went back to school for social work. We would try so hard to do right by the residents but would be blocked by poor management, understaffing, and zero effort from the rest of the systems in those kids' lives. Heartbreaking. Got the shit repeatedly beat out of me at a Mormon boarding school in Provo, Utah. Almost everyone there was kept on incredibly high doses of antipsychotics to keep us in line and so we couldn't fight back. When we did there was getting beat. Strapped to a table. Injected with drugs like Haldol and tossed naked into a concrete cell. School was a joke there and didn't actually bother to teach anyone anything. And the therapists, well, what they and the other employees deserve probably isn't allowed to be said on here. Those that have been know what I'm talking about. Basically, the whole experience was rather quite unpleasant. I've seen so many comments now talking about Provo, Utah. Are there a bunch of facilities there or just like one super shitty one? There's a bunch in Utah. Cheap land plus preachy Mormons plus lax laws for children's rights equals profits. I did the Northwest Youth Conservation Corporation. It is not exactly a troubled teens program. But I was put in an interesting situation. I joined because it seemed like a fun way to spend a summer outdoors. Doing some hard but worthwhile work in the wilderness. And make some money to buy a home-built PC gaming rig. I knew another person joining for the 6 weeks and it just seemed like a normal teenager summer thing. For the most part it was. See? Usually the crews are 5 guys. And 5 girls. They did not have enough girls. So I got put on the all guys crew. The all guys crew had what seemed like mostly troubled kids and a few outright dangerous kids. We also got all the hardest projects and worked our asses off. Still loved every minute of it and reflect upon it fondly. If you are ever walking the trail along the coast to Cannon Beach in Oregon, I helped build some of it. I know someone who did that in the late 80s. Had a great time. And learned a trade that supports him and his family to this day. Those are nice trails. Thanks. I was definitely a troubled teen. A lot of running away. Drugs. Alcohol, etc. My parents sent me to Elan School. In Maine. When I arrived I was strip searched and showered by a girl. Not staff. It was pretty hellish. Abuse was the norm. It was a couple hundred kids and a very small handful of staff. Essentially if you won privileges you got to run things. Until you messed up and had to begging the status climb all over again. We weren't allowed to make friends. That was called a contract and other kids would report you. Our days were spent watching each other. Waiting for a chance to tell on someone because that helped elevate your status. If you mess up enough you'd get shot down. Sometimes that meant a costume meant to provoke ridicule. Sometimes being put in the corner. Literally. Unable to speak. Not allowed to move around. Guarded for however long by another kid. If the corner person wasn't cooperative then both got in trouble. There was also the boxing ring. One house or multi-house general meetings where you'd stand while everyone rushed you. Screaming as loud as they could about what a terrible person you are. I can't type anymore tonight because I'll have bad dreams. Almost 40 years later I still see certain faces. If anyone is actually interested I can add more tomorrow, without touchpad typos lol. I'm sorry you had to go through that. I attended a school similar to Elan. Excel Academy in Texas. I have mixed feelings about it but it definitely messed me up. I'm not sure how anyone has the idea that these types of punishment and tactics help people get better. Constant verbal abuse and forced isolation is a recipe for a mental breakdown, not mental enlightenment. Anyways. Sounds like being shot down was similar to being put in red shirt or jumpsuit, and we also would get placed in the corner on blackout where you weren't allowed to communicate with anyone. Some people were on blackout for weeks unable to speak to anyone. We also had life skills every day or so where people would be shamed, taunted for stuff they did. They told my parents lies and I couldn't defend myself to them about anything because every communication between them was screened. I remember getting really mean letters from my parents about stuff that I never did. It was maddening. There was no personal privacy ever and we also had to have weekly body searches. I knew a person that went to Elan. The boxing ring sounds so inhumane. I'm so sorry for anyone who had to participate in that. Edit. Spelling. From Wikipedia. In March 2016, Mark Babbitts of Elan Survivors Inc. contacted the Maine State Police, who announced they had opened a cold case investigation into the death of former Elan resident Phil Williams, who died Dec. 27th. 1982 after participating in Elan's brutal ring where students were forced to fight each other as a means of behavior modification. So apparently they actually fought in the boxing ring. Went to Dundee Ranch Academy when I was 15. I am 32 now. It was shut down by the embassy for child abuse and living conditions among other things. I was there for a year and I still have nightmares of being trapped or jailed and other triggers. Sucks. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. My first gold. Thank you, anonymous Redditor. I'm 31 and got sent to a diff wasp school when I was 15 until I was 17. I remember the one in Mexico Casa by the Sea got shut down and we got a ton of kids from there just sleeping in the hallways. Crazy shit. If the parents only knew. I had pink eye at Dundee and they made me stay on a towel on the floor in a hallway until my pink eye went away. It was horrible. Half the girls ended up getting it anyway. I went to a therapeutic away program for a month and I witnessed a lot of ducked up things. They gave me some unneeded medication. And I witnessed a girl beat another girl up on the ground and get her hair pulled out of her scalp. The same girl also poured chocolate milk on another girl's head. We also weren't allowed to speak to the boys because apparently a girl and a boy had sex in the guy's dorm thing. Also, a girl was accused of sexually harassing another girl and had to sleep outside. Shit's whack. Man. Every time Christianity is mentioned, I just wonder how much any staff actually understand the Bible. Read? Sure. Understand? Not at all. My experience with being forced to stay at a boarding school was horrible. It was highly abusive in uncountable ways. The staff were unprofessional and most certainly not there to comfort you in any way. They actually did the opposite and called us names like liars and manipulators and overall tried to make you feel like a bad person. They controlled every aspect of every moment of your waking life. It was not therapeutic at all. Anyone who says otherwise who went to these places is either brainwashed and in denial or enjoyed the sadism of bullying other students. The ones willing to snitch on and mistreat others did well and advanced in the program. I was emotionally victimized by staff and students. There was no such thing as personal space or privacy. I was physically assaulted and abused by the staff. I am appalled these schools are still around and operating. Duck parents that put their children through that hell. They should not be legally allowed to continue to abuse children for profit. There's too many examples of abuse to put in one post. I am happy and relieved to say the school I was sent to was shut down for child abuse. Thank God. I was sent to the infamous PCS, Provo Canyon School, from 1994 to 1996. At the crescendo of the Standing Ipes era, I witnessed a lot of beatings and rapes. But thankfully I was never party to either one of those things. I kept to myself enough and got along with everyone. The worst thing was during a stint in investment. I noticed a few other kids working on loosening a pipe from a drain trap on a sink. I thought that shit was funny at the time. Because hey, petty vandalism. Right. Well, our group goes to the gym and these thugs hid the detached pipe in a towel. I didn't know until I see our big dopey counselor get whacked hard as duck in the head. I was the only one that stayed behind while the rest took his keys and escaped. They didn't get far. And when they were caught, they were all beaten mercilessly and restrained for days before being hauled off to juvie, or real jail, or the hospital morgue or whatever. What was ducked is that the counselor was one of the few good ones. I used to stay up and play chess with him when he worked night shift. Worse yet, he had two brothers working there, who went from kind of a-holes to violent psychopaths after all that. And I got singled out because I was the only one left who was there when it happened. When the dust settled, I still did another few months in investment. Stood over 1,000 IPs. Didn't see the sun for over 3 months. Plus I took a lot of blame for not preventing that whole thing. Still no regrets. Because I would have also taken a pipe to the head if I tried to do anything. Ro. Thank you for sharing this. I'm glad you survived this experience. What is a standing IPS? And is investment like solitary? Ugh. Standing IPs. PCS had a ridiculous number of rules, varying in severity from class 1 to class 4. Class 1 offenses were things like being late to line up, or having a shirt folded wrong. 3 of those added up to a class 2. A class 2 would award you with 20 IPs, or investment points. Things like swearing, back talk, not cleaning up after yourself, etc. would earn you a class 2. And you'd be told to take a chair. That means sit on the floor and face the wall for a while. And shut the duck up unless you want to make it to class 3. Now for a class 3. That's a paddling, cursing someone out, fighting, real back talk, stealing, or just pissing off the staff would get you 100 IPs. And most likely slammed, physically beaten by a former bio football player, and dragged off to investment while wearing a set of hinge handcuffs tight and as far as possible. So if you had IPs, you had to work them off by standing. That's it. Just standing. Not moving. Not looking at anything. Not talking. 29 minutes would work off 2 IPs. Then you get a break for a minute to drink water. Or fart. Or take a piss. If you had fewer than 100 IPs, you worked them off in short-term investment. That means after school, from like 3 to 9 PM, at least you could return to your unit and sleep in your own bed. Over 100 IPs. And now you're in long-term investment. Now you lose your bed. Don't go to school. Don't go outside. And stand IPs from 6 AM to 8 PM. Then go straight to bed. You don't go back to your unit until your balance is back to 0. Solitary would have been better than standing IPs in some ways. The investment unit had seclusion, which was like solitary, but a smaller room. No toilet. And you spent all day and night in a bed locked in humane restraints. Edit. TL. DR. Take a chair. Class 2. Dial 9. Duck you. Best comment of the day. Nobody. Parents, let's send our unwanted children to a prison-like environment where there's a good chance they'll either end up dead, driven to suicide, or turned into dangerous criminals and drug addicts. That'll teach them to play with those Pokemans.